Let's start. Lars Roschanak, great to have you here. Before we are starting, it would be great if you can introduce yourself. I mean, you already had a session, but I think we have some people that joined later, so it would be great if you can maybe quickly start introducing yourself.
Sure. I'm Roschanak. I'm an AI research scientist in a medical tech company called Elekta. And I develop deep learning models to tackle different problems that we have with medical imaging in the whole process of radiotherapy. Things like image segmentation, registration, reconstruction, lots of things that we can automate it and make this process faster and with higher accuracy.
Perfect. Lars, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Lars Hansen. I run the computer vision team in AstraZeneca. We're a team working across multiple business areas, so we work on medical imaging as well, but also laboratory imaging, looking at different chemical structures from microscopy data, as well as operations use cases where we do monitoring and defect detection in our manufacturing plants.
Perfect. I mean, the topic of this fireside chat is actually the value of better data. And we clearly know that the collection and preparation of data is the most important step within computer vision. So, I mean, let's kick off with something simple. I mean, what actually means data quality for you?
Data quality, I think, is the state of the quantitative and qualitative information that we have. And, of course, when we say, for example, pieces of information that we have, when we say we have high quality data, I think means this data, it's a better fit for the specific application that we have. It very depends on the application we have, the data, and the person who is judging that. So what I feel like sometimes for the same application, the data can be judged differently. And that's why maybe we have data governance that it comes and then we have to define some specification for the data and the quality of that. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so some things can obviously be bad quality data, like if there's a pen left in a medical image, that's unfortunately shouldn't be there, and you can filter that out in certain means. But for other use cases, it might be really hard to say. I mean, you might have something that you think is bad quality, but it's really the best you can get for that type of use case, and you didn't have to find a way to deal with it. So the quality of the data is, one definition, as you said, is it fit for the use case? Good quality is good enough quality for the use case, but it could also be, is it as good as you can reasonably get it with your collection techniques? Yeah. And from there on, it might still not be as good as you want this as a computer vision engineer, but it is as good as you can get it for a certain use case.
So, I mean, you already mentioned it. I mean, how do you actually identify like these bad data samples? I mean, you mentioned like a pen in the picture, but I mean, how are you finding it? I mean, how are you finding like this bad data?
I mean, there are a number of techniques to do that. I think this is a classical example. A pen in the picture, a doctor, or drawings on it. You try to find a tumor in an image, but actually the doctor drew a circle around the tumor, so it just finds the circle that the doctor drew, right? So you can find that when you test your models with, let's say, attention maps. What is the model looking at? But at least you have to do thorough testing for your model. You'll find a lot of things there. But you can also do things by using various unsupervised techniques to cluster your data and investigate those. And you might also find these type of cases which should definitely be filtered out. So and that can be simple unsupervised techniques up until training large self-supervised models, getting the embeddings, clustering them, and using that as a technique to be able to sort or filter your data based on quality.
Yeah. Which of these techniques are you using at AstraZeneca?
I mean, I think a lot of different techniques are being used. In our team, we probably use less than we should. And if you ask about the metrics we use, I'm probably going to not be answering it as well as we want to be. But there are other teams who are quite mature on it, more mature in the journey, and they are, for example, using the embeddings, clustering on embeddings, and using that to do data quality on their images before they do any use them for any purpose. So it's a bit of everything, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. What about you? I mean, how are you identifying like bad data?
So for us, it's very, we are very dependent to the experts. So we need the help of these clinicians and the experts to judge. For example, usually when people go for radiotherapy scans or any type of imaging scans, they should take off any kind of jewelries they have, anything with metal, for example, even for CT scans. But last time I had the data that I saw, like the patients, for example, they had their trousers on, had their necklaces, and then I was like, this is bad data, I'm not going to use this in my model. But I noticed that maybe this data is coming from a hospital or patients that they are disabled. How are we going to do that? And then I couldn't exclude that data. So for us, there are things that maybe they look odd, or even if we take let's say, a big population of the data that we have, we don't see anybody wearing jewelries. But if there is one patient wearing that, or they can't take it off, we still have to consider that. So it's we are very dependent to the clinicians to judge us or give us some, for example, criteria how we can judge the data, what we can exclude, what we can include. Yeah, mostly is that.
Okay. And I mean, how much data do you actually need for your models?
It's very different, and if I tell to the guys that they don't do medical imaging, they would laugh. But usually in medical domain, it's very difficult to get tons of data. So sometimes, I don't know, it depends. It's very dependent on the application we are working, and most of the time the data is not enough. For example, sometimes we can see like people publish papers that they only had 5 patients, 20 patients. Data, it's a problem. We don't have lots of real data, but that's why we're trying to, people try to use augmentation and use synthetic data to help to increase the amount of data we have.
Okay. I mean, how much data do you need for your use case?
More.
Always.
But I mean, a lot of use cases you'd have in 50 to a few hundred samples, and you wouldn't have much more than that. And they could be, and you can do a lot with that if you're smart about it. So you can use synthetic data. You can train on you can find. So now I was talking about data you might label. You might train on unlabeled data. So find like in medical imaging is common technique. Train on large unlabeled self-supervised techniques on large unlabeled data sets, and then you can fine-tune on much smaller domain-specific data sets. But getting enough data can be it's often a challenge. Even stuff like we look in operations around defect detection. Just getting enough images of a rare defect can be very tricky. So for any type of use case, we often end up with, you sit with quite small data sets, and you have to be clever about how you then get good performance, evaluate your models, think about generalizability, data quality, even though your data sets are limited in nature.
So, I mean, you both mentioned, right, I mean, that you have very small data sets. I mean, how are you actually making sure that it then really works for the real life use case? Because, I mean, yeah, okay, you have like your training data, you have your validation data, right? Everything is fine. And then you're putting like your application out there in the wild and you see, oh, wow, the results are not what I've expected. So how are you making sure that it's actually then working out in the wild? Maybe Lars.
I mean, I think often the first time you put it out there in the wild, it doesn't work very well. I think people, and maybe there's not enough acknowledgement of that, but you need to put it out there and test it, and you'll often find that there's things you need to improve. In medical imaging, there's probably a lot more things are being published that's actually, so you train a model, you write a nice paper, than actually being put out there, because if you try to build a tool around it, and the data has changed a little bit, then it doesn't work anymore. I think you see that quite frequently. So, but getting it out there early and doing a lot of testing and then thinking smartly about, can I exclude my bad quality data? How will that affect it when I deploy it? Does it generalize to different domains? You have to think thoroughly about that and iterate a lot of those things before you get a well-performing model out there.
Can you kind of like create data within your production environments? I mean, can you make pictures of patients, etc., and then use this data to train your models further, or are you purely relying on your test sets?
Well, so one of the problems in the regulated environment is you might have limited ability to even go and collect data, and definitely to use it and iterate and collect more when it's put in use, because then you have to do your whole validation process again for whatever tool you have created. So the whole, how do you test something safely in a regulated environment is a challenge, and sometimes we can, and other times we cannot. So it depends a lot on the use case. I mean, with patients, it's definitely an issue to put a diagnostic tool, for example, out there and let the doctors use it, but also have a big disclaimer saying it might not work, because a medical doctor might do their work differently now that they have the tool. So how do you know it's safe to give them the tool if it's not working properly, or you don't know how well it works? That's a big challenge, and that's also why I think the adoption of AI is quite slow in the pharmaceutical industry. For one of these, I mean, that's one of the reasons.
What about you? I mean, how are you making sure that actually the models you have trained are then working out in the wild?
So as Lars said, when the problem that we have is the amount of data that we have. So we have to make model with whatever we have. If we are allowed for the specific applications, we can do, for example, data augmentation, use synthetic data. We make a model. And as he said, as soon as we have something, we should test it. And maybe data comes, for example, from different centers, different hospitals. And then we can detect and find out the false positive, false negatives. What's the problem? How we can solve the problem? Why our model is working better for some type of data. And then like this, of course, with the, for example, for my case, we can get the input of the clinicians. If, let's say, in the matter of image processing side, we see like the images for us is have, for example, the same statistical features. We expect they perform the same, but it's not. So we have to find out what is different from them and how we can, let's say, augment data like that it can, because we are finding edge cases like that. Sometimes we don't know in healthcare domain that what are the edge cases. And by doing more experiments on more different data, we can find out more.
But how do you know that something is not working? I mean, like, if like somebody tells you that something is wrong, I mean, you know, like, in which direction you need to go, but how are you getting this feedback?
Simplest way is like if, of course, the people who are using, for example, let's say software that we are giving to them, it's one, for example, case that we see, okay, this, I don't know, this image segmentation technique that we are using is not working. Another thing is because we are doing sequence of work, like imaging tasks, like there are blocks of tasks right after each other. Maybe at some point we don't, for example, detect the error with, I don't know, for example, maybe for example, we do DICE score, the simplest way for segmentation. Maybe by then we don't see that much error there, but when we see like in the next stage that we're doing, for example, the second task, there is some error there with the matrices that we use for that specific task, then we can find out and come back and see what's the problem. But as I said first, we are very dependent to the judgment of the doctors, because even the ground truth comes from them.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, you both mentioned already data augmentation. I mean, which kind of data augmentation techniques are you using? And I think what would be super interesting also is like which ones are not working, because like, I mean, that's sometimes the even more interesting question.
I can tell you exactly what we are doing, but I can just share that data augmentation for the field I'm working in, it's very tricky. Because later on, when we want to get FDA approval, we have to have a very great reason for them, that why we have done this. And that's why we see like there are lots of good papers, as Lars said, for example, lots of good papers in academic papers that we see in medical field, but even if some of them, as he said, they are not working on our data, some of them that they are in augmentation, we are not even allowed to use them. Like GAN, for example, we don't see many products that people are using GAN to make data, to augment data. And the reason for that, how are we going to validate that or justify that? Lots of research has been done to translate, for example, CT scan to MRI or MR to CT, especially MRI is expensive, so people can go from CT to MRI. But how are we sure that it's exactly, it's very difficult to judge it. That's why they're not using it.
But you might see there a big difference between what you do internally. So let's say it's not, you don't need to use these medical images for present the results to the authorities. You might easily then use GANs or other techniques internally, but you lose a lot of your toolbox once you go to the regulators with it, because you have to provide a lot more statistical guarantees around your results to a regulator, and that also, it limits you. But I mean, you asked about the data augmentation. I mean, it definitely works depending on the use case, but it's hard to say which thing will work well until you have your data and you know your invariances of the data. But particularly in medical imaging, there are a lot of advanced techniques you can employ. So there's a whole research topic in itself. While, for example, if you work on our defect detection use cases, we can do something relatively basic if you want to do data augmentations.
I mean, do you have like problems? I mean, like normal use cases, right? I mean, you named it like for example, defect detection, right? Or also what we are doing at like XPy, right? I mean, you have like this classical problem which we have also seen on the example for Shell, right? I mean, you have like different lightning, you have occlusion, etc. Is this like a problem that you're facing with your data, or is this because, it's a problem?
Yeah, of course, lots of data. Of course, we don't have the problems like the one you were showing, but let's say if the patient has a metal artifact, a metal implant in their body, that would give us lots of artifacts or noises that it's very difficult to remove that. Even if the temperature of the room is higher, so it would, like the type of noise that we have is different. And a general model that is able to remove all of this or treat all of this data in the same manner, it would be a challenging task for it.
What about you, Lars?
I mean, we have a lot of the same problems. So, I mean, for our manufacturing environments, we have a lot of the same, we saw from Shell here, the same problems that if you move to a different manufacturing line, if you move to, it might be in a different location, might be the same building, you might look at different type of material that you want to detect defects on or detect at all. How do you make it robust to that when there's a change? You can't just expect to take something and deploy it at a new manufacturing line or a new site with no adaptation. In things like medical imaging, even a scanner, different, I mean, there are not just one industry standard for how you do CT scans or how you look at tissues. So the things look different depending on who did it, which equipment was used. And when you train on small data sets, you have that might look like good quality data, back to the quality data aspects, but you're not sure that the data you're going to feed the model when it's being used looks the same, right? It might have worse quality, which you might just have to accept. So there are loads of techniques then to translate from one domain to another. But that's also it's a tricky topic that you could probably dwell into for the last 25 minutes. But yeah.
I mean, how much more data you're getting out of your base data, right? I mean, let's say like you have a base data of whatever 1 million images. I mean, like if you put like augmentation on top of it, are you getting like 5x, 10x, 100x? I mean, how much more are you generating out of the augmentation in your use case?
Depends. Problem by problem is different, or the data by data is different. some of the augmentation techniques, as Lars said, some of the simplest one are easy to use or we're allowed to use, and some of the more complex one is difficult or needs different justification for that. I don't have an exact answer because for different problems we have, it's very different. Yeah, it depends. And of course, but we try to keep the most of the data that we have from the real data, because of course, for the FDA approval stuff that I said. Maybe for your case it's different.
Yeah, for some use cases, I mean, you get, I wouldn't say how many times extra data you get, but I mean, you get how much better performance do you get when you add it. And for certain use cases, not all, but some, you definitely do get better performance. But it's not doesn't solve your problems. It gives you, it's one tool in the toolbox to get slightly better performance and to get models that are slightly more robust and generalizable, which you then have to see if that's enough for your use case. So it's a useful tool, but it's not the end-all tool.
Okay, let's move on from data augmentation to how to really measure data quality. I mean, which kind of metrics are you using to measure your data quality?
Task by task is different, what we are going to do and how we measure the data quality. There are some standards that we have, for example, the raw data that we get, some standards of, for example, I don't know, the amount of noise that this data has, or for example, I was showing you like this machine when it rotates around the patient. Was it a full scan? Was it not a full scan? So there are lots of different parameters that would limit us, for example, to do further analysis, even using traditional algorithms, not deep learning one, or generate even the ground truths that we have. So these are the things that it very depend on the application, and we use different measurements. But at the end, I keep saying this sentence, but that's the truth for our case, that we really need these experts in our field, the medical physicists, the radiologists, to judge the quality of the data that we have and let us know that if we can, for example, use this further or not. Because the setting of that these images are acquired are also sometimes can be wrong, or maybe we need to do something specific, some special, let's say, pre-processing step to bring the quality of this image into the normal, into the main distribution of data that we have that is able to use.
But I mean, how are you really measuring it? I mean, you're always like stating, right? I mean, like your environment or whatever, but what are like the top 2 metrics that you're using to judge if the data has good quality or not?
If we think about it like this, okay, the matrices that is very important, I'd say the data we need to look at it, the generalization of the data is important, the timeliness, the consistency, and mostly the consistency is one of the main matrices that we use.
Okay. Lars, what about you?
I mean, to be honest, we don't have any fixed metric for data quality, but for certain use cases, so it depends what you want to do with data quality. If you can have a fixed camera and you can collect, say, of some type of material, a defect you want to detect, and you can improve the data quality by changing that setup, so you can get better quality during test time, then the performance of the model is the metric, ultimately, that determines, that says something about data quality, because you can keep the same models and get better performance. But this only makes sense if you're making adjustments that you get during the use of your model, right, at inference time. And looking at the quality only at the training data is not something we have systematically implemented. And it can also be dangerous because you don't want to necessarily, you might get better performance by reviewing bad quality data, but you might also get a less generalizable system if you're not making changes that you also make at inference time. So you have to be careful about what you do with that metric.
Okay, I mean, let's get a little bit more concrete. I mean, I completely understand for both of you, you're in a highly regulated environment. Okay, super big problem. You have very little data set, super big problem. I mean, a little bit more tangible. I mean, like, what are like the last one or two problems you have seen like with the data you have been working with, and how did you overcome them? Maybe Lars, you can start this time.
Well, one use case we've been working on is images of crystals that are growing.
Sorry, of what?
Of crystals, so that are growing, chemical structures. And one of the problem there is we look at the data and some things are in focus, but a lot of the crystals are out of focus. And that's the nature of how the data is collected. So the quality of the images look quite bad, but it really is. It's not something that is in our ability to change in the experimental setup. So figuring out how do you deal with having a small data set like that, and you want to segment crystals when a lot of them are quite poor is a challenge, especially when you have a small data set. But on that use case, for example, using synthetic data to have a pre-trained model that are quite good at detecting crystals is one way of getting around the low amount of data and the troubles of having a lot of things that are not in focus.
What about like kind of like all these like super resolution kind of models out there? Have you tried them for this kind of use case when you had like kind of bad quality images?
You think in which kind of models do you think?
I mean like kind of like this upscaling, like to get like actually to take like a picture that has a bad resolution, bad quality, to upscale it to actually get like a better, I mean like a pre-processing step almost.
Yeah, so yeah, it's another technique you could try. I think we chose not to try that yet, at least on this type of use case where the synthetic data route has worked quite good. But it's something to consider.
What about you?
Yes, so there are techniques that we use, and sometimes like some techniques that, going to your question, that is, for example, what tasks that we are using. One of the, for example, latest tasks that I'm working on, for example, can be lots of different tasks, image denoising, image segmentation, but let's say that for us, we can physically model how would be the noise in this specific setting that we had the patient. For example, the noise of, I don't know, from, for example, the temperature, the noise from, lots of different noises can be involved when we are doing this treatment and some of them we can physically model them. And sometimes we can use some of these models, and then we can see like, it gives us the output which looks even better than our ground truth. We can't use it. Maybe it's better, maybe it's the right answer, but still we can't use it. Because to the best knowledge that we have is that physical model that we have. And we can make a good judgment that, okay, the noise here is like, it's less noisy. Is it a good thing or bad? And of course, also because we have sequential data, data from patient at different points, we can also refer to that and do a comparison and see whether maybe this kind of, let's say, denoising that we've done, maybe it removed the noise, but it somehow fused some kind of artifact that we don't know now how to deal with this. So it's very challenging, lots of different comparison at different stages and different timelines we have to do.
Perfect. I mean, let's move to a slightly different topic. I mean, we have learned from Eyal that people, process, and tools are the most important thing to ensure quality in the whole cycle. So we have seen how JP Morgan is doing it. So what's your setup?
Do you want to?
Lars, please start.
Well, I mean, you have a reference architecture that looks similar. It would be good to actually have them and look them. How much is actually implemented is a different story. Mm-hmm. So on the people and process side, it's a journey, and it's a journey full of challenges. So I think the thinking is there, right? But actually getting there in terms of having the right skills, having the right technologies, making it easy for people to use is a challenge. And I think a lot of the challenges you also have computer vision engineers who just want to do computer vision, or machine learning engineers wanting to do machine learning. So if you want to implement model monitoring, I mean, make it easy for them, right, to do that. And if that's going to take you a lot of work to implement, then you need someone else to do that. And a lot of companies, I don't think, are in that stage of investing that enough in what it takes to get things and to deliver it end to end. So it's getting there.
Rushanak, what is your setup?
I can't tell you.
Okay, it's a secret.
Some part of it, honestly, it's a bit confidential about the exact settings that we do, but in general, it's the same as Lars said. We have some specific predefined, let's say, settings that we have to follow, but yeah.
Okay, fine. Then let's get a little bit more specific. I mean, every one of us need data, right? So somebody needs to label this data. I mean, how are you doing it in your case? I mean, I've said, right, I mean, how we're doing it at XPy, we are whatever, creating our own data. We have like companies labeling it for it, right? Or we're taking open source data. We're challenging whatever kind of like the labels which are there. What is your setup?
Let's say we are doing image segmentation and the contouring is done mainly by a clinician, by a doctor. There are tools that now we can see that, for example, lots of softwares there that transfer learning, they are trained on some data set. We can use that, gives us a pre-segmentation, but still we need a clinician to amend that. It's not perfect. We need them to correct the errors, and then we are sure that, okay, this is the right contour that we have. And usually we need to have multiple raters. We can't only trust the judgment of one person.
How many do you need?
Depends, case by case is different. I've seen for some cases up to 3 different people. It can be more, it can be less, but the projects I worked in, 3 people were at least working. And it's very interesting that the doctors who are trained in different countries, also they do different kind of delineation. Like doctors in Germany, if you look at their papers, we see it's slightly different than the doctors in the UK. Of course, it's not only maybe what they see, because maybe it's based on the experience that they have. Maybe, I don't know, the way the contour is working better for German people. So that's why it needs to be, data needs to be from different centers, raters should be from different centers to make a better judgment and better.
So who is more accurate, the UK doctors or the German ones?
In the UK, Germany, British.
Okay.
In Germany, for sure, Germans.
I mean, as you said, right? I mean, it's important to have different people in this process. So you already mentioned that you're using doctors from the UK and from Germany. Are just the only 2 places that you're using, or are you also having people in other? No,
I didn't. I mean, of course, they can be different doctors from different centers. And this one that I talked about, it was a paper that I was seeing. When I was at Cambridge University, I was working with doctors, British doctors, And then they were looking at the papers from Germany, and they were like, oh, they do it different. But for us, usually the variation of data is very important, because we want to see the data comes from different countries, different centers, how different they are. And usually the data that comes from different centers, of course, then we can get the different ground truths for them. Mostly the data from some multinational countries, let's say America, it's really reliable and really great, because we have many different races there and different people from different races. Their maybe bodies slightly different. The doctors can come from different backgrounds, and that's a great thing. But let's say if we only have medics from one center, data from one center, let's say, I don't know, maybe Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, maybe the data that they make, the model that they make, it's very good for that country, but it wouldn't be necessarily working very well on European people or European patients. Is this clear?
Yes, perfect. Thanks a lot for giving us all these insights. Lars, what about AstraZeneca?
So we do very little outsourcing of annotation work. And I think the times it has been tried, it has not proven very successful in terms of the quality you're getting back. So most annotation work is done in-house, but that means it's done by either people developing the models, or it's done by scientists, all of which have a day job, which is not to annotate data. So you get a very limited amount of hours for people to annotate. That's the nature of the game. So it's another challenge in having small data sets. You also don't get a lot of annotations because people don't have time. So then it's about what Roshanak said, making it easy for them to annotate. So if you have a pre-trained model that can give you segmentations or bounding boxes or something advanced, right, then they will need to adjust annotations. That might introduce new bias, but still give you better models. It's also really important to have multiple people annotate just to quantify the variability between annotators, because that's a really important point when you want to see how accurate your models are. Often you're not aiming for models that are 100% accurate. So, how do you know what the human variability is that you want to reach with your models? So being able to quantify that is important. And it's also for any regulated use cases in the regulatory guidelines that you have to have domain experts part of every part of the step of doing a machine learning project, which includes the annotation part. So it's we do it ourselves, but it's an important area to keep a focus on. I'd say it's also important to get good annotations, right? So even on use cases where my team would be annotating themselves, having two people look at the annotation and review it just gives you better model performance. So it's worth putting that time into that piece of the process.
I mean, I hear it over and over again. I mean, you have problems because of the regulation, so it's very, very hard. So what's actually the one thing that should be changed in the regulation which would make your life way easier? Lars, do you want to start?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the regulators, they're there for a reason.
Yeah, that's right.
I think so. Of course, there are they have different opinions. I think most of what needs to change is the field needs to mature. I think that's a big part of it. You can't. The regulators will just require very, very strict evidence around how your model works. If you can't provide that, you don't get to put it out there. And a lot of industries don't have that problem. But I mean, it usually means they'll put something that's not very good out there in the first run, and then iterate on it. And in certain industries, you have to have a better. So if anything to change, you have to have a better test bed for new things, right? How do you test it and iterate on it without impacting any patient's life, for example? But it's just a very tricky topic. But I think the regulators, I mean, they are doing things to innovate in this field, but also the AI industry needs to mature. We saw it on screen earlier, like a number of different steps you need to do to get a project right. I mean, if there's a reason you need to implement these things, is to have some control guarantees around what you're developing. So it's also about, if you get this to that stage faster, the regulators also have more belief in what you're doing.
True. Rushana,
Yeah.
anything to add from your side?
Yeah, so as Lars said, we need to have this regulations because the knowledge of, we need the knowledge of the, let's say, experts. And if we want to skip that part, we need to, let's say, people who are doing, let's say, computer vision, we need to have the knowledge of them to be able to find proper matrices, proper way of doing the analysis that those people are telling us to do. And that wouldn't happen easily because they've been trained for years and years, and the knowledge that they have is not easy to gain for us. So as he said, I totally agree with him that the domain is still, that we are working, is not mature enough. The hardwares that we are using, for example, to acquire our images are not perfect enough. So we need all of these regulations, unless we would face problem and we would kill people, and that's not what we want to do.
I mean, at the end, you're not killing people, right? I mean, there is no like whatever action that is automatically triggered. You rather give like advice, right?
I mean, it can happen, right? Let's say if we are, for example, doing the segmentation, if we don't get the insight of the doctor, if it's right or wrong, and then we can just keep treating people with the segmentation model that we have, and of course, if one pixel left or right, it shifted. Let's say if the tumor is in the brain, it's gonna kill the patient easily, right?
Okay. So maybe we are waiting a little bit longer. Maybe just one last question from my side. I mean, in your area, are there actually any commercial or like open source data sources that you can use, or is this always that you need to source this data by yourselves?
Again, depends on what exactly, because this field we're working on, there are lots of different things. Some of the data is either our company or the competitor companies, they provide some open source data for researchers to work on them. But basically the raw data which comes from the machine, it's very rare to find it somewhere. And usually this public data that we see, the open source data, is very clean. Lots of these artifacts, noises are removed. They've done it in a really, the data is very consistent. Of course, if they are there, we are using them, and it would help us to increase the amount of the data we have, but for some applications, we don't have much. Yeah.
Lars, what's your experience?
I mean, there are lots of public data sets out there. There's a lot of academic initiatives, particularly to share data sets. That's one of the ways to advance the field as well. So it's there, but the problem is you only get what you can find, and then you don't get the opportunity to iterate. If the public data set doesn't contain images of a certain type or certain artifacts, for example, that you're looking for, then you're a bit short. So you get limited in what you can do when you don't get the opportunity to collect and iterate yourself on the data you have.
Perfect. So it seems to make a lot of sense to found a startup here to create this data and get it pre-approved by the regulator. I think there are a lot of people that would be interested. Rushana, Lars, thanks a lot for all the insights you have given to us, and to the rest of you, we have lunch break now.